Greetings and salutations, friends. I am back once more after having survived COVID. For the time being, at least. I'm sure I'm going to sound a little bit different for a little while still, partially because the COVID isn't entirely over just yet, and because I've got a complete new recording setup. So I took the week to get everything set up as well, so there's probably going to be a while of sorting and tweaking, etc. before everything's entirely back to normal. I did, however, also have plenty of time to watch through Andor, and it was pretty much exactly what I suspected, and it is a rare day indeed when I find myself in a position to heap honest praise upon Disney. For with Andor, if nothing else, they were honest, as the series showrunner stated again and again and again that he didn't actually give a shit about Star Wars. And it shows. Andor is, hands down, the least Star Wars show to be produced in the Star Wars universe so far. And as the showrunner pretty much stated, it appears to basically just be a spy show that occasionally goes to space, and which comments on the Trumpian world, of course. And there we have it. Andor, which neither feels, looks, or sounds at all like Star Wars, is instead a supremely detached origin story of our titular main character, Cassian Andor, who grew up on a shithole planet as an Amazonian tribesman before being drugged and abducted by an old woman who forced him to call her mother. Suffering quite heavily from Stockholm Syndrome at this point, the rainforest slave boy that is Andor spends a nice long time skip together with Mother on a recycling world of some sort, which is itself apparently a part of an independent corporation with relative self-governance from the Empire. Alright, okay, that's a cool idea at least. Let's explore that. Oh, it's already over and the self-government part is donezo. Haha. Well, I mean, that was an enjoyable 30 seconds, I guess. And all because our hero swiftly decides to execute a couple of police officers and sell an important doopity-doo-doo-bub-doopity-boop-boop to finance his escape from justice. After this, the story is about as cliched as you could possibly imagine from that introduction. Andor is recruited by a secret agent dude who just must have his unique skill set, who we are assured he absolutely, totally has somehow, somewhere, in some shape or form managed to cultivate over his long years on a recycling planet. But even with Andor's incredible skills, the mission is impossible if it were not for a thingamajig that will happen in precisely 3 days' time, which means that his new group of friends armed with AK-47s sigh. But anywho, due to the time constraints, they have no time to teach him. They simply hand him a manual and say, "Get to it, boy." Because if they don't do it in 3 days, the stellar phenomenon will not be there, and without it, their slow-ass freighter will not possibly be able to outrun the TIE fighters, whom the show tells us will apparently require 9 minutes to cross 52 kilometers. Making the TIE fighters considerably slower than a World War II aircraft. And get this, the crippled TIE fighters are merely the icing on the convenience iceberg. The target of our diverse band of thieves and scoundrels is the entire payroll for an Imperial sector, apparently transported in solid cash for reasons, and stored in a single spot, a spot guarded by a, quote, regiment, as the show calls it, of 40 soldiers. Why would the Empire guard trillions in cash with 40 dudes, you may ask? Well, because, quote, no one would be stupid enough to try and rob it. Sigh. Again. This is the second time now in recent memory that the bad guys in the Star Wars movies decided to leave incredibly important top-secret facilities practically unguarded for this reason. You know, at some point, one would be stupid to not take the gift so freely proffered, but oh well, details. And honestly, I have zero interest in this overtly predictable story, or in Cassian Andor's adventures, in fact. It is a large part because it is Andor's adventure that I just don't care, because this is a prequel. I know Andor will survive just fine, and as if to hammer this point home, just in case someone in the audience is not aware that this is a prequel, we get this pair of scenes, where first a body armor wearing corporate trooper dies instantly from a shot to the shoulder, as one does in Star Wars. This is a well-established part of Star Wars lore. And 5 seconds later, Andor takes an identical hit and shrugs it off like a mosquito bite. Because he, of course, isn't wearing armor, and therefore, the projectile weapon does far less damage. Duh. Oh, and just in case you thought letting the director do whatever he wants would at least result in a more professional product, where the director would actually put some genuine passion and interest into it, well, think again. See, Andor very clearly gets shot in the shoulder here. And yet in the next episode, voila, his wound has quite magically transmigrated to his upper arm. And now, it is merely a glancing las burn, a flesh wound, if you will. Because even the director, I guess, thought it a little retarded to have Andor waffle about unfazed from having a quarter of his shoulder vaporized. But at this point, it is just a trend, isn't it? Showrunners and writers who have zero interest in the subject material phoning home the details. In the Rings of Power, Galadriel's armor magically reappears after having presumably swum all the way from the west alongside her, whilst in Kenobi, the little Lola robot opens a hatch with no means of actually doing so, and then has to have a stagehand close it after the robot. And now we are finally at the point that even if a character gets shot, the wound is so irrelevant and unimportant that even the cake-cucking director cannot be asked to remember where it was. And if the creators do not care, why should I? If you want Star Wars, then this already isn't it, as it was deliberately designed not to be. And if you are looking for a spy/heist movie, then there has got to be better alternatives than this around. Genuinely. So far, the only parts I have found even remotely interesting have nothing to do with Andor or the plot, but rather the fate of the poor corporate security officer. I mean, the dude was just doing his job, and then Andor, the murderer, screwed everything up. And now, he has lost his job and has had to move back home to his mother. Honestly, this is far more of a riveting tale than Andor's adventures, because again, this dude's fate is unknown, whereas Andor's fate is completely known. It is a dark day in Star Wars history indeed, when I genuinely care more for the security guard who just went off with his pension than the hero in a Star Wars story. Though I suppose there never was much of a Star Wars story to begin with. And that is an important point, because here's the thing. I have myself often argued that Star Wars needs to be something a bit more grounded, that it needs to take a bit of a step away from the Star Wars, that it needs to divorce itself a bit more from the Jedi and the Sith and the lightsabers, and instead take a delve into the universe, to give us a look at the grittier side of things. But the grittier side of Star Wars. I would love a band of brothers set in the Star Wars universe, for example, showing us the point of view of an Empire patrol or a group of rebel soldiers, but nevertheless it must be Star Wars, showing us the origin story of a character we already know and, well, who cannot die or ever be in any real danger throughout the show, and then on top of that, making it the least Star Wars story imaginable. Well, this isn't grittier, more interesting Star Wars. This is simply not Star Wars. Which really kinda defeats the entire point. Though, I do suppose simply not making Star Wars, but still producing Star Wars, is one way to fight the Star Wars fatigue that Disney is struggling with. Alternatively, they could simply try making good entertainment, but that would probably be a little bit too complicated, wouldn't it? Andor, not recommended.